My son kicked me out of my own bedroom and moved his entitled wife into my bed like she owned the place. They thought this 70-year-old woman would just accept being treated like a burden in her own home. But what they didn't know was that my name was still on the deed, and I was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. Before we begin this story, I want you to know how much it means to me that you're here listening. Please let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. My name is Beatrice, and at 70 years old, I never imagined my own son would treat me like a stranger in the house I'd spent 40 years paying for. But that's exactly what happened. When my son Caleb married his second wife, a woman named Sienna, who seemed to think marrying into our family meant she was entitled to everything I'd worked my whole life to build. Let me paint you a picture of what my life was like before this nightmare began. I'm a retired bank manager who spent 4 decades climbing the corporate ladder when women weren't welcome in finance. Every dollar of my comfortable retirement was earned through 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and proving myself twice as hard as any man in that building. My husband Gerald and I bought our 4-bedroom colonial house in 1981, and after he passed 5 years ago, that house became my sanctuary. It's a beautiful home, hardwood floors throughout, a kitchen I renovated myself in the 90s, a master suite with a walk-in closet and garden tub that I'd dreamed of since I was a young bride living in a studio apartment. Every room holds memories. The living room where we celebrated Caleb's graduation from college, the dining room where we hosted 23 Thanksgivings, the bedroom where Gerald and I planned our retirement dreams before cancer took him too soon. Caleb had always been my pride and joy. After his first marriage ended in divorce, I supported him emotionally and financially through some rough years. When he met Sienna, I was genuinely happy for him. She was attractive, well-dressed, and seemed to make him smile again. But I should have paid more attention to how she looked at my house during that first dinner invitation. Not with appreciation, but with calculation. The warning signs started during their engagement. Sienna would make comments about how outdated my decor was, how the house was too big for one person, and how lucky I was to have all this space I didn't need. She'd walk through my home like she was already mentally redecorating, picking up my mother's china and asking where I'd gotten it, running her fingers along my furniture and sighing about how some people have everything. I tried to dismiss it as nerves. Wedding planning is stressful, I told myself. Maybe she was just trying to connect with me and didn't realize how her comments sounded. But deep down, something felt wrong about the way she'd stare at my jewelry box when she thought I wasn't looking, or how she'd ask detailed questions about my finances under the guise of caring about my future. The wedding itself was beautiful. I paid for the flowers, $3,000 worth of white roses, because Sienna insisted on having the best of everything. I didn't mind. Caleb was my only child, and I wanted his day to be perfect. Sienna seemed genuinely grateful, hugging me tight and calling me Mom for the first time. I thought maybe I'd been wrong about her. Maybe we could build a real relationship. For the first year of their marriage, things were relatively peaceful. They lived in Caleb's apartment across town, visited every other Sunday for dinner, and Sienna seemed to be settling into her role as my daughter-in-law. She still made the occasional comment about the house being too much for me, but I attributed it to concern for my well-being as I aged. Then, Caleb lost his job. He'd been working as a marketing manager for a small tech company that went under during an economic downturn. Suddenly, they couldn't afford their rent on just Sienna's income from her part-time job at a boutique. When Caleb called to ask if they could stay with me for just a month or two while he found new work, I didn't hesitate. Of course, sweetheart, I told him. There's plenty of room here. You can have the blue guest room upstairs, and we'll figure everything else out together. I should have established boundaries from day one. I should have had a conversation about expectations and timelines, but I was a mother who wanted to help her son, and I naively believed that Sienna would be grateful for the temporary sanctuary I was providing. They moved in on a rainy Tuesday in October. I helped carry boxes, made them a welcome dinner, and even bought new towels for the guest bathroom. Sienna seemed subdued that first week, almost embarrassed about their situation. She kept to herself mostly, spending hours on her laptop applying for better jobs and being unusually quiet during meals. But by the second week, subtle changes began. Sienna started rearranging things in the kitchen, moving my coffee maker to make room for her expensive espresso machine. When I mentioned that I preferred my setup the way it was, she laughed and said, "Oh, Beatrice, you'll love this change. Trust me, I have an eye for these things." She began commenting on everything. My choice of television shows was too depressing, my dinner recipes were too heavy for modern diets, and my morning routine of reading the newspaper on the porch was antisocial. Each criticism was delivered with a smile and a tone that suggested she was helping me improve my life. The most unsettling change was how she spoke about the house when she thought I couldn't hear. I'd catch fragments of phone conversations where she'd describe our place to friends, talking about how she was finally living somewhere decent and how she had so many plans for improvements. 3 weeks into their stay, I overheard a conversation that should have been my wake-up call. I was coming back from my evening walk when I heard voices through the partially open living room window. Sienna was on the phone, and her tone was different, sharper, more calculating than the sweet voice she used around me. "She's completely set in her ways," Sienna was saying. "Everything has to be exactly like it was when her husband was alive. The whole house is like a museum. But don't worry, once we're established here, things are going to change. She just doesn't realize it yet." I stood frozen on my own porch, listening to my daughter-in-law discuss my life like I was a problem to be managed. "Caleb thinks it's temporary, but I'm not stupid. Why should we struggle to afford rent when there's all this space going to waste? She's not getting any younger, and honestly, she seems lonely. We're doing her a favor by staying." The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. I quietly entered through the back door and spent the rest of the evening processing what I'd learned. Sienna wasn't grateful for temporary help. She was planning a permanent takeover. I decided to give them the benefit of the doubt for a little longer. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe she was just venting frustration about a difficult situation. But I started paying closer attention to the small changes happening around my home. My framed photos were being moved to less prominent locations. My mother's antique vase disappeared from the mantel and reappeared on a shelf in the basement. When I asked about it, Sienna claimed she'd been dusting and forgot to put it back. My favorite reading chair in the living room was suddenly in the way of the new furniture arrangement Sienna decided we needed. The breaking point came exactly 1 month after they'd moved in. I came home from my weekly grocery shopping to find my bedroom door closed. This was unusual. I always left it open to let in the afternoon light. When I tried to enter, the door was locked. I knocked. "Hello, is someone in there?" Sienna's voice came through the door. "Oh, hi, Beatrice. I'm just reorganizing some things. Give me a few minutes." 20 minutes later, she emerged with a bright smile and paint samples in her hand. "I was thinking we could freshen up this room. The color is so dated, and with better lighting, it could be absolutely gorgeous." I looked past her into my bedroom, my sanctuary, the room I'd shared with Gerald for 30 years, and saw that she'd moved furniture around and taken down several of my personal photographs. "Sienna," I said carefully, "this is my bedroom. I don't need it redecorated." Her face faltered for just a moment. "Oh, I know it's your room. I just thought, well, you spend most of your time downstairs anyway, and this room has the best natural light. I was thinking it might make a better master suite for Caleb and me, and you could take the guest room. It's cozier and, honestly, more appropriate for someone your age." The audacity took my breath away. She was suggesting I move out of my own bedroom so she could move into it, and she was framing it as if she was doing me a favor. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "This is my room in my house, and I'm not moving anywhere." Sienna's mask slipped completely. "Look, Beatrice, I'm trying to be nice about this, but let's be practical. You're getting older, and that guest room is closer to the main bathroom. It makes sense for everyone if we just make some adjustments to the living situation." "The living situation," I repeated slowly, "is that you and Caleb are temporary guests in my home." "Temporary?" She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Honey, Caleb hasn't found a job yet, and realistically, we can't afford to move out anytime soon. We might as well make everyone comfortable." That night, I called my attorney. Helen Patterson had been handling my legal affairs since Gerald died, and she'd also been a friend for over 20 years. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a long moment. Beatrice, you need to be very careful here. If they establish residency in your home, removing them could become complicated. Have they been receiving mail there? Yes, Sienna changed her address for several accounts. How long did you agree to let them stay? I said a month or two, but nothing was put in writing. Helen sighed. I'd recommend having a clear conversation with Caleb about timeline and expectations, and document everything. Take photos of your belongings, keep records of any damage or changes they make. If this escalates, you'll want evidence. I followed Helen's advice, but the situation continued to deteriorate. The next morning, I found Sienna had rearranged my kitchen again, this time moving my dishes to a high cabinet I couldn't easily reach and replacing them with her own set. When I asked her to change it back, she sighed dramatically. I'm just trying to make the space work for all of us, she said. But if you want to make this difficult, fine. Just remember that Caleb and I are family now, and families make compromises. That afternoon, I discovered she'd been going through my personal papers. My desk drawer was slightly open, and documents I kept in a specific order had been shuffled. When I confronted her, she denied it, but I caught her looking through my mail the next day. I was just organizing, she claimed. You have so many papers everywhere. The violations kept escalating. She started using my personal bathroom when the guest bathroom was perfectly fine. She moved my late husband's reading chair to the basement without asking, claiming it didn't fit the aesthetic she was creating. When I found it buried behind boxes and insisted on bringing it back upstairs, she rolled her eyes and muttered about living in the past. 2 weeks later, the final insult came. I returned from my doctor's appointment to find a locksmith leaving my house. Sienna was standing in the doorway, looking satisfied. What's going on? I demanded. I had a new lock installed in the master bedroom, she said casually. For privacy. Don't worry, I'll give you the code if you need to get in for any reason. I stared at her in disbelief. You put a lock on my own bedroom door? It's really for everyone's comfort. This way, there's no confusion about personal space. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. She put a digital lock on my own bedroom door and was acting like she was doing me a favor. That evening, when Caleb came home from a job interview, I sat him down for what I thought would be a reasonable conversation between mother and son. Caleb, we need to talk about Sienna's behavior. She's making changes to my house without permission, going through my personal things, and now she's put a lock on my bedroom door. My son, my sweet boy, who I'd raised to be respectful and kind, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was dismissive, almost pitying. Mom, I think you're overreacting. Sienna is just trying to make things work for all of us. Maybe you're not used to sharing your space, but we're family now. I'm not overreacting, Caleb. She told me I should move to the guest room so she could have the master suite. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, would that really be so bad? I mean, you are getting older and the guest room might actually be more convenient for you. I felt like he'd slapped me. My own son was siding with a woman he'd known for 2 years over the mother who raised him. This is my house, Caleb. I built my life here. I'm not moving to the guest room so your wife can play house in my bedroom. Mom, you're being selfish. We're trying to rebuild our lives, and you're making it harder than it needs to be. Sienna is just trying to help. Help. She is systematically taking over my home and erasing me from it. That's dramatic, Mom. She's just making some adjustments to make everyone more comfortable. I realized then that I had lost my son completely. The woman who raised him, supported him, and opened her home to him meant less to him than keeping peace with his manipulative wife. That night, lying in my own bed, which I could only access by asking Sienna for the code, I made a decision. They wanted to play games with my house? Fine, but they had no idea who they were playing with. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my volunteer work at the library and spent the day making phone calls. If Sienna and Caleb thought they could manipulate a helpless old woman, they were about to learn that 40 years in banking had taught me a thing or two about leverage. My first call was to Helen Patterson. I need to know my legal options, I told her. Can I sell my house even if they're living in it? As the sole owner, yes, you can sell your property. But Beatrice, are you sure that's what you want to do? This seems extreme. Helen, my son has chosen his wife over his mother, and that wife is systematically taking over my home. Yesterday, she installed a lock on my bedroom door and told me I should move to the guest room. I will not be pushed out of my life. There was a pause. All right, if you're serious about this, we'll need to do it properly. I can have the house appraised this week and start looking for buyers, but this will likely destroy your relationship with Caleb. Helen, that relationship is already destroyed. He just doesn't know it yet. My second call was to Ruth Henley. Ruth was a retired real estate agent who'd sold half the houses on our street over the years. More importantly, she'd been watching the drama unfold next door with great interest. Ruth, hypothetically speaking, how quickly could someone sell a house in this market? Ruth chuckled. Hypothetically, if someone had a beautiful colonial in this neighborhood with original hardwood floors and a renovated kitchen, they could probably have multiple offers within a week. Why do you ask? Just wondering. That's when I decided that they had messed with the wrong grandmother. My third call was to my bank. After 4 decades of employment, I still had connections there. I asked about expedited processing for property transfers and got the information I needed. By the end of the day, I had a plan. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that people don't pay attention to what you're actually doing. Sienna and Caleb saw a confused old woman who was having trouble adjusting to their presence. They had no idea I was orchestrating their eviction. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I seemed resigned to the changes they were making. When Sienna moved more of my belongings to the basement, I just nodded sadly. When she started talking about updating the living room, I acted defeated and said maybe she had good ideas. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. I photographed the lock on my bedroom door, the boxes of my possessions they'd relegated to storage, and the way they'd taken over my home. I kept a detailed journal of every conversation, every change they made, and every dismissive comment about my age and capabilities. But most importantly, I was putting the wheels in motion for their greatest nightmare. The appraiser came on Thursday while they were both out, Sienna at her part-time job and Caleb at another job interview. A pleasant woman named Carol who seemed impressed with the condition of the house and the neighborhood. Properties like this are in high demand, she told me. Original hardwood, mature trees, good bones. You could expect multiple offers if you decided to sell. That's good to know, I said carefully. Friday afternoon, Ruth came by with what she called market research. She'd prepared a comprehensive analysis of recent sales in the neighborhood and had even identified 3 potential buyers who were looking for exactly what I had to offer. One of them is a cash buyer, she whispered conspiratorially. Young couple, he's a doctor, she's a lawyer. They want to move quickly and don't need financing contingencies. Interesting, I murmured. That weekend, Sienna made her biggest mistake yet. She invited her mother to visit. Diane was a piece of work, loud, opinionated, and just as entitled as her daughter. The moment she walked into my house, she started making pronouncements about how outdated everything was and how lucky I was to have someone with Sienna's taste helping me modernize. This wallpaper in the dining room has to go, she declared during dinner. And these curtains are from the Stone Age. I smiled politely and served dessert. But the real show came when Diane started talking about their plans for the house. Plans that apparently included converting my home office into a nursery, turning the basement into a media room, and completely renovating the kitchen. Of course, it'll take some time to convince Beatrice to make these changes. She's very attached to keeping things the way they were. Well, Diane said bluntly, at her age, she should be thinking about what's practical. This house is too big for one person anyway. Caleb said nothing. My son, who I raised to stand up for what's right, sat silently while 2 women discussed renovating my home as if I wasn't even there. That night, I made the call. Helen, I want to proceed with the sale. How quickly can we move? I can have the listing ready by Tuesday. Are you absolutely certain about this? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Monday morning, while Sienna and Caleb were out, I had 3 showings. The house showed beautifully. I'd spent the weekend polishing everything and arranging flowers from my garden. The cash buyers Ruth had mentioned came for the second showing and fell in love immediately. "We'd like to make an offer," the husband told me. "Full asking price, cash, quick closing." "How quick?" I asked. 30 days. I accepted on the spot. Tuesday, the "for sale" sign went up in my yard. I was watering my roses when Sienna's car pulled into the driveway. She was talking on her phone, laughing about something, when she noticed the sign. Her laughter died mid-sentence. She hung up and marched over to me. "What is that?" she demanded, pointing at the sign. "It's a for sale sign," I said, calmly, continuing to water my flowers. "You can't sell this house." "Actually, I can. It's my house." Caleb's car pulled up behind hers. He got out, saw the sign, and went pale. "Mom, what's going on?" "I'm selling the house," I said simply. "I've accepted an offer. We close in 30 days. The explosion that followed was everything I'd expected and more. Sienna started screaming about how I couldn't do this to them, how they'd made this their home, and how I was being vindictive and cruel. Caleb just stood there in shock, opening and closing his mouth like a fish. "Where are we supposed to go?" Sienna shrieked. "I suppose you'll need to figure that out. The new owners take possession on the 15th of next month." "Mom, you can't be serious." Caleb finally found his voice. "This is our home too." "No, Caleb, this is my home. You were guests. Guests who overstayed their welcome and decided to redecorate without permission." "We'll fight this," Sienna snarled. "We'll get a lawyer. We have rights." I smiled. "Feel free to call a lawyer. I think you'll find that as temporary guests in my home, you have very few rights indeed. But please, waste your money on legal fees if it makes you feel better." That night, they huddled in their room, my room, making frantic phone calls. I could hear Sienna crying and Caleb's voice getting more desperate as he called everyone he could think of for help. The next few weeks were delicious torture for them. They tried everything. Caleb begged, pleaded, and finally threatened to never speak to me again if I went through with the sale. Sienna alternated between tears and rage, trying to manipulate me one moment and screaming at me the next. They called other family members, trying to get them to intervene. My sister, Louise, called to ask if I'd lost my mind. "Beatrice, Caleb is your son. How can you throw him out on the street?" "I'm not throwing him out on the street, Louise. I'm selling my house. He's a grown man with a wife. They can find somewhere else to live." "But where will you go?" "I've bought a lovely condo downtown. 2 bedrooms, modern kitchen, elevator access. It's perfect for someone my age." The truth was, I'd used part of the proceeds from the sale to buy a beautiful condo in a 55-plus community with a pool, fitness center, and social activities. It was everything I wanted for this stage of my life, and I was excited about the future for the first time in years. They tried to sabotage the sale by being difficult during the home inspection, but I'd prepared the buyers for potential issues. When Sienna tried to tell them about problems with the plumbing that didn't exist, they just smiled politely and continued with their inspection. Caleb attempted a different approach. He started bringing up childhood memories, trying to guilt me into changing my mind. "Mom, remember when we planted that oak tree in the backyard for my 10th birthday? You said it would grow up with me and we'd always have this house to come back to." "I remember," I said quietly. "I also remember raising you to respect other people's homes and treat your elders with dignity. I've made mistakes, but please don't destroy everything over this." "Caleb, I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting what's left of my self-respect." Sienna tried tears next. She came to me with red eyes and a trembling voice, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Beatrice, I know I've made mistakes. I got carried away trying to make this feel like home and I overstepped. But please, we don't have anywhere else to go. Can't we work this out?" For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Sienna, if this apology had come before you put a lock on my bedroom door, things might have been different. But you didn't respect me when you thought I was powerless. You only care now because you realize I hold all the cards."
I was wrong. I see that now. Please give me a chance to make it right. You had your chance. You used it to try to push me into the guest room of my own home. With 2 weeks left until closing, they made increasingly desperate attempts to stay. Caleb researched tenant rights, hoping to find some legal loophole that would prevent the sale. He discovered that without a written lease agreement, they had no legal standing whatsoever. Sienna started packing and unpacking their belongings repeatedly, as if she couldn't accept that they were really leaving. I'd find her sitting in my bedroom, which she still controlled with that damn lock, staring out the window with tears streaming down her face. They found a small apartment across town, the best they could afford on short notice. It was cramped, outdated, and nothing like the spacious home they'd been planning to steal from me. "It's a dump," Sienna said bitterly during one of their viewing appointments that I overheard her describing on the phone. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and the kitchen is from the 1980s. After living in a beautiful house like this, I don't know how I'm going to survive. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd called my tastefully updated home outdated when she was trying to take it over, but now it was beautiful when she was losing it. Their friends started avoiding them. Apparently, the couple who had been bragging about their upgrade to a gorgeous colonial were now admitting they were about to be homeless. The embarrassment was eating them alive. Caleb made one last desperate attempt to change my mind. "Mom, what if we paid you rent? We could formalize this arrangement, sign a lease, give you market rate for the guest room." "The guest room?" I repeated. "So you'd pay me to live in the guest room while your wife keeps my master bedroom?" "We could work out the details." "No, Caleb, we couldn't. Because this was never about money. This was about respect, and you chose to give it to someone else." Sienna tried a different approach. She offered to move out and let Caleb stay alone. "This is between you and your son," she said, suddenly trying to position herself as an innocent bystander. "I'll go stay with my mother, and you two can work this out." How convenient. Now that the consequences are real, you want to abandon ship and leave Caleb to clean up your mess. "I'm trying to fix things." "You're trying to save yourself. If you really wanted to fix things, you would have thought about consequences before you installed that lock." As the closing date approached, their desperation reached new heights. They were realizing that their comfortable lifestyle, the spacious home, the nice neighborhood, the proximity to good restaurants and shopping was about to disappear. More importantly, they were realizing that their plan to gradually take over my house had spectacularly backfired. Instead of pushing me into the guest room, they'd push me into action. 3 days before closing, Sienna made one last attempt to manipulate me. "Beatrice, I'm pregnant." I looked at her for a long moment. "Congratulations." "Did you hear what I said? I'm having a baby, your grandchild." "I heard you. And you're still going to make us homeless?" "I'm still going to sell my house, yes." "How can you do this to your own grandchild?" "Sienna, if you're really pregnant, and I notice you don't have any doctor's documentation with you, then you should have thought about providing stable housing before you decided to steal mine." She wasn't pregnant. I found the empty box from a pregnancy test in the bathroom trash the next day, and she never mentioned it again. But what happened next made them realize their biggest mistake was thinking I was just a harmless old woman with no fight left in me. The closing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. That morning, Sienna and Caleb loaded their belongings into a moving truck they'd rented with money borrowed from her parents. They'd found a small apartment across town, the best they could afford on short notice. As I watched them carry boxes out of my house, boxes filled with dreams of taking over my life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. But that wasn't the end of my revenge. It was just the beginning. You see, while Sienna and Caleb were so focused on taking over my house, they never bothered to really understand who they were dealing with. They saw a lonely widow who they could manipulate and control. What they didn't see was a woman who'd spent 4 decades in banking, who understood exactly how financial systems worked, and who had connections throughout the business community in our city. Sienna had been so eager to establish herself in our house that she changed her address on everything: her credit cards, her bank accounts, her employment records, and most importantly, her professional licenses.
Oh, did I forget to mention? Sienna wasn't just working part-time at a boutique. She was a licensed cosmetologist who'd been building a client base for an upscale salon downtown. She'd been doing some work under the table, cash payments, no records, while claiming unemployment benefits from her previous job. I discovered this little detail during one of her phone conversations that I'd accidentally overheard. At the time, I'd filed it away as potentially useful information. Now, it was about to become the weapon that would complete my revenge. Monday morning, I made a call to the state licensing board. I'd like to report a licensed cosmetologist who may be working without proper tax documentation and potentially committing unemployment fraud. I provided them with dates, times, and details of the cash transactions I'd witnessed. I also mentioned that she'd been claiming my address as her permanent residence while living there without any legal rental agreement, something that might constitute address fraud for tax purposes. My second call was to the unemployment office. My third call was to the IRS tip line. I didn't make these calls out of spite. I made them because Sienna had shown me exactly who she was. Someone who thought rules didn't apply to her, who believed she could take shortcuts and manipulate systems to get what she wanted. If she was going to treat me like a fool, she was going to learn that this fool knew how to fight back. But I wasn't done yet. Remember how I mentioned I'd spent 40 years in banking? Well, one of my former colleagues, Patricia Wong, was now a senior loan officer at the largest bank in the city. When I explained my situation over lunch, she was appalled. "That's terrible, Beatrice. I can't believe your own son would treat you that way." Well, it's over now. But I am curious about something. Hypothetically, if someone had been claiming to live at an address they didn't actually have legal right to occupy, and they used that address on loan applications or other financial documents, what would that constitute? Patricia's expression grew very serious. That would be considered mortgage fraud or loan fraud, depending on the circumstances. It's a federal crime. Interesting. Beatrice, you're not thinking of... Oh, no, I'm not thinking of anything. Just curious about hypothetical scenarios. But I had noticed that Sienna had been receiving credit card applications at my address, and I'd seen her filling out paperwork that listed my house as her permanent residence. If any of those applications had been approved based on the assumption that she had stable housing in an expensive neighborhood, well, that would be unfortunate for her. The investigations began within 2 weeks. I know this because Sienna called me, sobbing hysterically, asking if I had reported her to the government. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said calmly. "Someone reported me for tax fraud and unemployment fraud. They're saying I was working while claiming benefits and that I used a false address on government documents. The only person who would know about any of this is you." Sienna, I think you're overestimating my interest in your life. I've moved on. My cosmetology license is under review. I might lose my job. How am I supposed to pay rent? I suppose you should have thought about that before you decided to commit fraud. I never committed fraud. Then you have nothing to worry about. She hung up on me. 3 days later, Caleb called. "Mom, what did you do?" "I sold my house and moved to a lovely condo. How are you settling into your new apartment?" "You know what I mean. Sienna is being investigated by 3 different government agencies. Her employer put her on unpaid leave until the investigations are complete. We can't afford our rent without her income." That sounds like a difficult situation. Mom, please, I know you're angry, but this is destroying our lives. Caleb, I didn't destroy your lives. Your wife's choices destroyed your lives. I simply made sure the appropriate authorities knew about those choices. She might go to jail. Then she should have thought about that before she decided to commit fraud. She never committed fraud. Then you have nothing to worry about. He hung up on me. The investigations moved quickly. The unemployment fraud was the easiest to prove. I had dates, times, and even photos of cash payments I'd witnessed. The address fraud was more complex, but equally damaging. The tax evasion would take longer to resolve, but carried the heaviest penalties. Within a month, Sienna's life was in ruins. The next few months were very interesting to watch unfold. The unemployment fraud investigation found that Sienna had indeed been working while claiming benefits, a total of $8,400 in fraudulent claims. She was ordered to pay it back with penalties, totaling nearly $15,000. The tax investigation discovered she'd failed to report almost $12,000 in cash income over the previous year, more penalties, more fines, and the possibility of criminal charges if the IRS decided to pursue them. The address fraud investigation was the most serious. She'd used my address to apply for 3 credit cards and a personal loan, claiming stable residence in an expensive neighborhood to improve her credit worthiness. The banks were not pleased when they discovered she'd never had legal right to occupy that address. Her cosmetology license was suspended, pending the outcome of all investigations. Without her license, she couldn't work at the upscale salon where she'd been building her clientele. Her dreams of becoming a high-end stylist evaporated overnight. Within 6 months, Sienna owed over $30,000 in fines, penalties, and restitution. She'd lost her job, her professional license, and her ability to work in her chosen field. The stress of the investigations and financial pressure began destroying her marriage to my son. Meanwhile, my new life was flourishing. My condo was perfect, bright, modern, and exactly the right size for my needs. I'd made new friends in my building, joined a book club, and started taking art classes. I traveled more now, visited museums, and went to theater performances downtown. Most importantly, I'd rediscovered who I am outside of being someone's victim. Caleb called me regularly during this period, not to apologize, but to beg me to somehow make the investigation stop. "Mom, you have connections. Can't you call someone and get them to drop this?" "I don't have that kind of power, Caleb. And even if I did, why would I help someone who tried to steal my home?" "She's learned her lesson. This is destroying her." Actions have consequences. She's 38 years old, not a child. She made calculated decisions to defraud the government and lie on financial documents. "Our marriage is falling apart." "I'm sorry to hear that, but your marriage problems aren't my responsibility to solve." 8 months after they moved out, Sienna finally cracked under the pressure. Caleb called me the day she moved out of their apartment. "She's gone, Mom. She packed her stuff and left. Said she was moving back in with her mother in another state." "I'm sorry to hear your marriage didn't work out." Are you really sorry? Or is this what you wanted all along?" I considered his question carefully. "Caleb, what I wanted was for you to respect me as your mother and treat my home with dignity. What I wanted was for your wife to show basic courtesy and gratitude. What I wanted was to feel valued and loved by my only child. Instead, I got manipulation, disrespect, and betrayal." "So you destroyed my marriage?" "No, son. I simply made sure that your wife faced the consequences of her illegal actions. The fact that she chose to commit fraud, evade taxes, and lie on financial documents had nothing to do with me. The fact that she abandoned you when things got difficult says everything about her character and nothing about mine." He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know how to come back from this." "Neither do I." That conversation happened 6 months ago. Since then, I've learned more about what happened to Sienna through mutual acquaintances. She moved back in with her mother in Ohio, where she's working at a chain salon making minimum wage plus tips. The fraud convictions on her record make it difficult for her to find better employment or get approved for loans or rental applications. She's essentially starting over at 38 with a criminal record and a mountain of debt. She'll be paying off the penalties and restitution for years. Do I feel sorry for her? Sometimes. In quiet moments, I feel a flicker of pity for a woman who threw away her future because she thought she could manipulate an old woman without consequences. But then I remember the look in her eyes when she told me I should move to the guest room, the way she wore my robe like it belonged to her, the casual cruelty with which she dismissed my feelings and my rights in my own home. No, I don't feel sorry for her. I feel proud of myself for refusing to be her victim. Last month, I received a letter from Caleb, a real letter, handwritten, not an email or a text message. In it, he apologized. Not a half-hearted, "I'm sorry you were hurt" apology, but a real acknowledgement of what he'd done wrong. He wrote, "Mom, I failed you as a son. I let my wife disrespect you in your own home because I was afraid of conflict with her. I chose keeping peace with my wife over protecting my mother, and that was unforgivable. I understand now that what happened to Sienna was the result of her own choices, not your revenge. I understand that you were protecting yourself the only way you could. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand how badly I failed you. I haven't responded to the letter yet. Forgiveness is a process, not a decision, and I'm not ready to make that journey. Maybe someday I will be, maybe not. But what I know for certain is this. I will never again allow anyone to make me feel small in my own life. I will never again sacrifice my dignity for someone else's comfort. I will never again be anyone's victim. The young couple who bought my house sent me a lovely card last week, thanking me for taking such good care of the property and sharing some photos of the improvements they've made. They painted the master bedroom a beautiful shade of blue and added new light fixtures. It looks happy and alive, the way a home should look. I'm genuinely pleased that my house, the house where I raised my son, loved my husband, and built my life, is now home to people who appreciate it. The other day, I was having coffee with my new neighbor, Ruth Ellen, who's become a dear friend. She asked me if I ever regret what I did. "Beatrice," she said, "you gave up your family home and probably permanently damaged your relationship with your son. Do you ever wonder if there was another way?" I thought about her question for a long time before answering. Ruth Ellen, I spent 70 years of my life making compromises, sacrificing my wants for other people's needs, and putting everyone else's comfort before my own dignity. I raised my son to be respectful and kind, supported him through his failures, and opened my home to him when he needed help. In return, he allowed his wife to humiliate me, steal my space, and treat me like an unwanted burden in the house I paid for. I paused, watching the morning sun stream through my new kitchen window. Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. Could I have tried harder to reason with them? Possibly. But would either of those approaches have resulted in them respecting me? I don't think so. Sienna saw me as an obstacle to the life she wanted, and Caleb was too weak to stand up for what was right. Sometimes, the only way to teach people that you have value is to show them exactly what they lose when they treat you as worthless. Ruth Ellen nodded thoughtfully. You know what I think? I think you did what every woman our age wishes she had the courage to do. You refused to disappear quietly. That phrase stayed with me. Refused to disappear quietly. How many women my age are pushed aside by their own families? How many are made to feel like burdens, like obstacles, like outdated furniture that needs to be moved to make room for the next generation? How many accept being diminished because they've been taught that sacrifice equals love? I started volunteering at a senior center downtown, and I hear these stories constantly. Women who gave up their bedrooms for visiting family and never got them back. Women whose adult children moved in temporarily and then took over their homes. Women whose daughters-in-law treated them like live-in servants while claiming to be helping. Most of these women suffer in silence because they're afraid of being seen as difficult, ungrateful, or vindictive. They've internalized the message that good mothers endure everything without complaint. I tell them my story not to encourage revenge, but to encourage self-respect. Last week, a 68-year-old woman named Francine approached me after one of my talks. "My son and his wife moved in 6 months ago," she whispered. "They've taken over my living room for his home office, filled my garage with their stuff, and yesterday she told me my cooking is too ethnic for their tastes. I feel like a stranger in my own home, but I don't know what to do. They say they're saving money for a down payment, but they go out to dinner 3 times a week." I looked at this woman, educated, well-dressed, clearly intelligent, and saw myself 8 months ago. "Francine," I said gently, "whose name is on the deed to your house?" "Mine." "Then it's your house. You get to decide who lives there and how they behave while they're guests in your home." "But he's my son." "And you're his mother. That means he should treat you with respect, not take advantage of your love." 3 weeks later, Francine called me. She'd given her son and daughter-in-law 30 days' notice to find their own place. They'd been angry, called her selfish and unreasonable, but they'd found an apartment and moved out. "I have my house back," she said, crying with relief. I can cook what I want, watch my programs, and sleep without worrying about what they're going to take over next. Thank you for showing me that I didn't have to accept being treated that way. These are the victories that matter now, not just my own liberation, but inspiring other women to value themselves enough to demand respect. I've started writing a book about my experience, not a revenge fantasy, but a practical guide for older adults who find themselves being manipulated or taken advantage of by family members. I want to share the legal resources I used, the emotional strategies that helped me stay strong, and most importantly, the mindset shift that changed everything. Understanding that love without respect is just exploitation with better marketing. My editor thinks it could help a lot of people. The working title is The Guest Room Rebellion: How I Stopped Being a Victim in My Own Home. As for Caleb, we've had 2 more conversations since his letter. The first was when he called to tell me he was seeing a therapist and working on understanding how his conflict avoidance had hurt the people he loved. He didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify his actions. He simply acknowledged the damage he had caused and told me he was trying to become a better person. The second conversation was last month. He called to wish me a happy birthday and to tell me he'd started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping women navigate the legal system when they're trying to leave abusive situations. I realized, he said, that what Sienna did to you was a form of abuse, financial manipulation, emotional control, systematic isolation in your own home. I enabled that abuse because I was a coward. Now I'm trying to help other women in similar situations. I was surprised by his insight and touched by his effort to make amends, not to me, but to other women who needed help. That's good work, Caleb, I told him. Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it, but I want you to know that I think about what I did every day, and I'm trying to make sure I never hurt anyone like that again. We're not reconciled. I don't know if we ever will be, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a flicker of pride in my son. Yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the day I sold my house. To celebrate, I invited Ruth Ellen over for dinner, and we sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the city. My little garden has flourished. The cherry tomatoes are producing more than I can eat. The mint has taken over its pot, and my roses are blooming magnificently. Do you miss it? Ruth Ellen asked. The house, I mean. I considered the question seriously. Did I miss the hardwood floors, the spacious rooms, the garden where I'd spent so many peaceful mornings? I miss the memories, I said finally, but I don't miss feeling like a prisoner in my own home. This condo represents freedom in a way that house never could again. She nodded. You know what I admire most about what you did? You didn't just get revenge. You got your life back. She was right. The revenge was satisfying, but the real victory was reclaiming my autonomy, my dignity, and the joy in living. This morning, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a book, a collection of poetry by Maya Angelou with a simple note tucked inside the front cover. Mom, I saw this and thought of you. Thank you for teaching me that phenomenal women don't go quietly into anyone's guest room. C. I sat in my sunny kitchen holding that book and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the humiliation, the fear, the anger, and finally, the decision to fight back. People sometimes ask me if I regret the nuclear option I chose. They suggest I could have tried mediation, family counseling, or simply setting firmer boundaries. But here's what they don't understand. Boundaries only work if people respect them. Setting limits only matters if the other party cares about your feelings. I tried talking, explaining, and asking for basic courtesy. In response, they installed a lock on my bedroom door and acted like she was doing me a favor. Sometimes, the only language people understand is consequences. Sienna and Caleb thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman who would eventually give in to their pressure. They learned too late that age doesn't equal powerlessness, and quiet doesn't mean defeated. I didn't destroy my son's marriage. His wife's criminal behavior and his own moral cowardice destroyed his marriage. I didn't ruin Sienna's career. Her decision to commit fraud ruined her career. I didn't break up my family. They broke themselves by choosing manipulation over love, entitlement over gratitude, and cruelty